We say the same thing over and over and over to come to naught.
The Prime Minister of Barbados, Mottley, absolutely roasted UN leaders in her speech at the General Assembly. So I cut the speech down to the highlights. Check this out.
If I use the speech prepared for me to deliver today, it would be a repetition of what you have heard from others and also from me. Equally, how many more times will we then have a situation where we say the same thing over and over and over to come to naught? My friends, we cannot do that anymore. How many more variants of COVID-19 must arrive? How many more before a worldwide action plan for vaccinations will be implemented? How many more deaths must it take before 1.7 billion excess vaccines in the possession of the advanced countries of the world will be shared with those who have simply no access to vaccines? How much more global temperature rise must there be before we end the burning of fossil fuels? And how much more must sea levels climb in small island developing states before those who profited from the stockpiling of greenhouse gases contribute to the loss and damage that they occasioned, rather than asking us to crowd out the fiscal space that we have for development to cure the damage caused by the greed of others? How many more times must people come to this podium and speak about the plight of the people of Cuba and Haiti and see very little being done to lift the floor of social development to give those people the right to pursue legitimate ambitions? The answer, Madam Vice President, is that we have the means to give every child on this planet a tablet. And we have the means to give every adult a vaccine. And we have the means to invest in protecting the most vulnerable on our planet from a changing climate. But we choose not to. It is not because we do not have enough. It is because we do not have the will to distribute that which we have. In the words of Robert Nesta Marley, who will get up and stand up? Who will get up and stand up for the rights of our people? Who will stand up in the name of all those who have died during this awful pandemic? The millions. Who will stand up in the name of all those who have died because of the climate crisis? Or who will stand up for the small island developing states who need 1.5 degrees to survive as we go to COP26? Who will stand up? Not with a little token, but with real progress. It is not beyond us to solve this problem. If we can find the will to send people to the moon and solve male baldness, as I've said over and over, we can solve simple problems like letting our people eat at affordable prices. I ask us, in the name of our people, to find the global moral strategic leadership. Global because our problems are global. Moral because we must do the right thing. And strategic because we cannot solve every problem of the world, but we must solve those within our purview immediately. Thank you.
What an incredible speech. And it touches on so much. It touches on climate change, on big tech, on world hunger, on Western nations' treatment of Cuba and Haiti. But I'm going to focus here on her comments about the vaccines. So this is an issue that has a very simple solution, yet major countries, rich nations, are refusing to allow the vaccines to be mass produced on a global scale. So I'll get to the specifics on that in a second. First, I want to show you the vaccination rates here. So, of course, wealthier countries, Denmark, Canada, Finland, Italy, France, UK, Germany, US, all doing well. And then we get to Barbados, it jumps down a bit. Vietnam goes lower. Philippines goes lower. Then you get to Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Zambia, and Democratic Republic of Congo. And yeah, there clearly is a serious issue in terms of how the vaccines have been distributed. It is purely based on which nations are buying them up, as opposed to looking at this issue as a global issue and what can we do to mass produce the vaccines on a global scale to meet the demand. So going down into the stats even further here, this from Our World in Data, they say 44.5% of the world population has received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, which sounds great until we break it down further. 6.13 billion doses have been administered globally, and 24.98 million are now administered each day. Only 2.2% of people in low-income countries have received at least one dose. This shows you the approach that we have had globally to this pandemic, where the wealthier nations are the ones eating up all of the vaccines and poorer nations are left to the side to pick up the scraps. Whatever's left over, they get, and so far, not much has been left over. So, actually, that's not even true. There is a lot left over. There's a lot of excess vaccines, as was mentioned in that speech, but they're not going to the poor nations. They're sitting there and oftentimes just going expired before they're even able to be used. So, this is where we get to the WTO waiver. Now, the WTO is not part of the UN, though the UN and WTO often work in tandem here. But from Common Dreams, a death sentence for so many rich nations once again block progress on vaccine patent waivers. So this TRIPS waiver, WTO TRIPS waiver, would allow these vaccines to be mass produced globally for a fraction of the cost, which would allow these vaccines to then be distributed globally in a more equal way than they currently are. But you have right now rich countries blocking the ability for this waiver to go through. So a few months ago, Biden actually backed it. So the U.S. now supports the TRIPS waiver. But as you see here, you still have just a few countries blocking this progress. So from Common Dreams here, despite having the support of more than 140 nations, the head of the World Health Organization, and hundreds of civil society organizations spanning the globe, the proposed waiver has been mired in fruitless negotiations for months as wealthy WTO members, most prominently Germany, the UK, and Canada, refuse to drop their opposition in the face of growing grassroots pressure. So you have 3 countries right now with more power than 140 nations in support of this waiver. And this still, to this day, continues to block progress to these vaccines being able to be produced, mass-produced on a global scale. And again, this is just one of the issues that was brought up in that fantastic speech, where you clearly have, in many cases here, the vast majority of nations agreeing on an issue, but because of the more powerful, wealthier nations like the US, the UK, Canada, Germany, because of their opposition to various issues, be it their position on Haiti, be it their position on climate change not going far enough, be it their position on vaccines, you have a minority of wealthy nations blocking progress, despite the fact that the vast majority of countries support that progress. But you have the Barbados PM here calling that out at the UN General Assembly, and it was lovely to see, but in reality, it's very unlikely to have any actual impact. But you see here the kind of pressure that these countries are under and their awareness of what is going on. And just one last thing here, as I discovered this after I shot the video. In fact, the US appears on the surface to maybe support the TRIPS waiver, but in reality, it's apparently dragging its feet. So this headline here, US says it supports a COVID vaccine patent waiver, but document reveals it is dragging feet at WTO. So according to a summary of the recent meeting at the WTO, the U.S. does not, in fact, support the TRIPS waiver as it is currently written. So, yeah, and again, this all goes down to Big Pharma. That's why, in case you're wondering why are they opposing this, it's because of their allegiance to Big Pharma. Large pharmaceutical giants, that is why there is this issue. Big Pharma wants to stay in control of the patents over the vaccines. Meanwhile, there is a clear need here to mass produce the vaccines on a global scale that would require third parties coming in and producing the vaccines, and Big Pharma does not want that. So even though the U.S. pretends to support the TRIPS waiver, apparently it doesn't.